It's so nice to see many faces that I've seen over the last 24 hours, which means that you are gluttons for punishment, which is really nice to see. It's a custom on Motzei Shabbos, after the Shabbos, to tell a Hasidic tale. I'll share one with you, which I found actually in the Gemara, that found its way to the Eastern traditions as well, most unusual. So the man sold his house and bought a horse. And all the villagers around him came to him and said, "You know, it's quite foolish. You sold your whole house to buy one single horse." And he said to them, "You don't know, wait and see." The next day, the horse ran away. So they all came and laughed at him. But he said to them, "You don't know, wait and see." The following day, the horse came back, followed by 9 other horses. So they came to him and said, "You're indeed a very wise man." To which he responded, "You don't know, wait and see." He asked his oldest son to break the horses in. The son fell off and broke his leg. They all scoffed at him, but the father said, "You don't know, wait and see." The following week, his country waged war against its neighbor. All the young men were drafted, except his son, who had a broken leg. Many of the others died. He didn't. So they came to him and said, "You're indeed a very wise man." To which he answered, "You don't know, wait and see." And of course the story is endless. People, we don't know. As I said earlier today, that challenge that faces us right now might be, God forbid, our downfall. Or it might be the very opportunity where we strive and reach much greater heights. We don't know. We have to wait and see. The question for tonight is, what posture do we adopt while we wait and see? And that's the topic for today. I'm going to invite you, as I did previously, to raise your hand and ask questions right throughout. Don't wait till the end. Correct me where I get it wrong, and that way we'll have a nice Socratic dialogue instead of a monologue. Okay? As I said, I've heard my voice before. A nice little statement. 1 out of 3 Americans today are suffering some form of mental breakdown. Think of your 2 best friends. If they're okay, then it's you. We live in a world of immense change. In fact, change is the nature of our reality. Nothing stays still. Everything is in a state of motion. Time and space keeps intermingling in different ways. And the way that we navigate those processes of change affects our physical, emotional, and psychological well-being. So what do? There's no such thing as being still, absolutely still. That chair that you're seated on, feel still. Put it under an electron microscope and you'll see it's a whirling dervish dance of molecules in a constant state of motion. In fact, the central features are so far apart, as is the distance between us and the planets and the galaxies. It's a wonder why we're seated on the chair and not fall through the empty spaces. Nothing is still. And it's us learning to surf the changes of life and the waves of energy that course through us that creates success. I have a son who enjoys surfing very much. And I watch him sometimes, paddling out from the shore, and then seemingly still while he is judging the waves as they come in. And then, when he adjudges a particular wave as the right one, he'll rise with agility onto the board, and he'll move his feet backwards and forwards along the board very quickly until his center of gravity matches the wave's inner energy center. And if that balance is correct, he'll ride that wave to shore. That's a metaphor of our lives. We're constantly surfing. We're surfing the waves and energy of Hashem's creation. And there are skills, mastery, that we need to adopt in order to be able to ride our personal waves to shore. And that's what I'd like to share this evening. How do we do it? Well, we have a very real obstacle course. And that obstacle course is called the media. Now, the media wasn't always as effective or even in existence as it is today. For some thousands of years, we lived in an agriculturally based society. Life was very similar for thousands of years. We were much more attuned and at one with nature. We were dependent, much more so, on Hashem's blessings in terms of earth and growth. We were living under the one roof, usually several generations. And we were able to learn the skill of living as a community, knowing how to help each other, knowing how to compromise, how to move forward. That all changed in a sudden moment of history. I speak of, in terms of a notion, the spiritual genetic code of time. That time is also encoded with a growth spurt process, like a teenager. A teenager whose physical growth accelerates, and very often the emotions are left back there to catch up. So is history. History too is replete with growth spurts. One amazing growth spurt took place in the 18th century. In that period of time coincided the following phenomena: the end of the Industrial Revolution, the beginnings of scientific method, the rise of nascent nationalism, ultimately culminating in the French Revolution, and the rise of Hasidism. All occurred in an amazingly short space of time. It was an amazing growth spurt. And for our purposes, Hasidism was given to us then because we needed to have coping mechanisms to deal with the amazing geometric pace of change that was about to be imminent. You and I have witnessed more change in the world than the cumulative history of humankind. Think about that. In our own life, thousands of years of change have coagulated into an extremely short space of time. That's quite amazing. By the way, don't worry about the phone. Usually when I'm introduced, the person introducing says, please turn off your phones. And I always get up here and say, please turn them back on. Why? Well, you spent an inordinate amount of time choosing your jingle, didn't you? And therefore, when it goes off, it tells me so much about you. And I get to know my audience so much better. So please, let the music run. So here we are trying to cope with the rate of change. Can our minds succeed? Well, we're finding that we're grappling. Now, even if there weren't extraneous circumstances that I'm just going to mention now, it still would be difficult. But media, as you well know, is not a beneficent educational institution. Media is a commercially exploitative mechanism whose singular goal is dollars and cents. And it knows its psychology very well. It knows that if it can place us in a state of fear, we'll remain glued to the screen, whatever that screen might be. And as a consequence, their ratings will improve. And therefore their advertisers will invest. And their profit margins will be higher. So it isn't something which is necessarily beneficial, and sometimes quite the contrary. So our minds and our hearts are being buffeted around by this messaging system. The kind of work that goes behind the scenes to script the evening news in such an artful fashion that will end up being fearful and insecure is quite amazing. And it works. We just have to look at the statistics of people's mental instabilities, their inability to cope. The kind of words that we use these days, like stress and anxiousness, which were not household words a couple of generations ago. So we need to have some sort of defense mechanism. I can't go into that tonight, but we need to have our critical faculties much improved. We need to go on news fasts much more often, and in fact, lead a life of reality quite independent of what they are telling us.
Shabbos is a news fast.
Shabbos is a news fast. I make Shabbos every day. There you go. I know that some people will say, but hold on, we have to live in reality. What's reality? I have a particular vantage point on anti-Semitism. I don't believe that it's any greater than it ever was, except in moments in history when whole populations tried to quash the Jews. And yet, in the most recent kind of newsworthy analyses, anti-Semitism is very much on the rise. There are in this country, I'm told, 350 million people. The number of incidents of anti-Semitism is X. X is a tiny proportion of the population. But when the news collects the items which will cause fear, it makes sure that it's compact, giving us an impression that we're living almost in an enemy state in some parts of America. And that's the truth about all aspects of the news. Compactness. Think about your own lives. In the last 24 hours, how many of you have had terrible incidents that have affected the quality of your life? Not many. And yet, we tend to have a victim mentality. There was somehow at the end of puppet strings and us unable to have the personal liberty and freedoms of our personal expressions and all the other features. What we call that sometimes is stress. I'm going to give you a working definition of stress. Stress is the experience of dissonance between the way I want the world to be and the way it is. How I want you to behave and the way you do behave. Between the way you want your children to be and the way they really are. That gap of expectations is called stress. But don't think that stress is out there. There aren't any stressors in life. I know that's a big statement. There are no stressors in life. We create our own stress. Stress is the way that I interpret reality. Now, of course, there are things in life that obviously hurt us. In other words, physical assault hurts. We know full well that when tragedies occur, it hurts. But they don't occur that often. And the vast majority of our lives are in neutral land, where you and I have the capacity to be able to paint the picture of our everyday lives positively if we so choose. Stress is subjective, and I'm going to elaborate on that in a moment. So far you've been very docile. All right, I'll just keep going then. Let's analyze it in this way. Stress results from the brain registering the heart's fear, producing a state of anxiousness in the absence of positive resolution. So we've got a few things there. We've got things like brain and heart. We have to ask ourselves, what is it that we're talking about? What, for example, is brain as opposed to mind? Now you might say I'm simply playing with words. I'm not. Let me give you the following model. 3 seconds after a person dies, we should all live bis 120, please God, to 120. But 3 seconds after a person dies, they neither hear or neither see. Why? And you'll answer me, because they're dead. But that answers nothing. I don't know what the word dead means. The body hasn't decomposed in 3 seconds. And yet, their consciousness in terms of sight and hearing is missing. Surely we have to conclude that something's gone AWOL. Something has left. Just like a bed lamp has a cord connected to the wall outlet. And when you turn a switch, the light comes on. When you turn the switch off, it goes out. Yet, even when the light is off, there's still the bed lamp, there's still the cord, and there's still the power outlet. And you'll say, obviously, there's no current. Likewise, in death, a current has stopped flowing. If you like, call that current neutrally energy. We're going to call it neshama, which is a generic word for soul. But whatever it is, it flows through the mechanism. The mechanism is called the body. I refer to it as our spacesuit. You know, the neshama, that energy, flows down from the rarefied atmosphere of no time, no space. Somewhere way up there. And here it is, sent down to a world that's very limiting time and space, a material world. It finds navigation very, very difficult. Impossible. So it's given a spacesuit to be able to operate. The body is that spacesuit. And the neshama operates through the mechanism of the guf. Guf is the word for body. In many different ways. And unless we maintain the integrity, health and well-being of the body, it's not going to operate optimally. That's why it's an absolute mitzvah to maintain health and wellness. As much a mitzvah as it is to keep Shabbos or kashrus or anything else. Because that's the way that the neshama can reach out and touch the physical world that Hashem created. So, when the neshama flows through the physiology of the eye, we register that subjectively as seeing. When it flows through the technology of the ear, we subjectively experience that as hearing. When it flows through the very complex mechanism of the brain, the way we experience it is called mind, seichel. So there's a difference between mind and brain, which is what I wanted to point out to you. Having said that, and explained it to some extent, we can then understand that there are features that you and I have of the souls flowing through the brain, resulting in consciousness, imagination, thought, curiosity, analysis, focus. All these things are productive aspects of mind. Let's talk about emotions. Could someone in the room, I've got to get you guys talking, you're too quiet. Could someone in the room please tell me what is an emotion? Come on, the average age is 25. You've had 25 years of life's experience. Please tell me what's an emotion.
It's the link between the mind and the body.
Very good. And you wouldn't say that the link between the mind and the body is cerebral? Where do emotions get into the picture? Come on, somebody.
They tend to be in the gut.
It's in the gut, which sort of defeats us talking about stomach then, doesn't it? What is emotion? I said the ridiculous statement the other night to you that Torah teaches us we should never be angry under any circumstances. And you all got immediately angry with me. What is emotion? Reaction. Good. Nuclear, electrostatic, mechanical. Which kind of reaction are you talking about?
Biological.
Biological. That's a nice big word. Biological reaction. But isn't a biological reaction when we get cut by a paper cut and it bleeds? Not necessarily emotional. It might be just factual. Okay, the truth is I'm cheating. I asked you an impossible question. When I asked you for definition, I asked you for words. Words are the natural expression of mind. Words are not the natural expression of emotion. Behavior is a much better expressor of emotion. But we can distinguish between the heart and emotion. Heart is the technology, the tool. When the neshama flows through it, the result is emotion. So you end up with things like feelings or examples of feelings like anger and joy. You can have depth of emotions, it can give you a lift, it can provide you an energy surge, etc., etc. It's got some very powerful results. And if we had the time, I would share with you much more about the chassidus of mind and emotion. But I'll give you a peek here. And you could further explore that with the rabbis here, the Rebbitzins here. Emotion in our teachings, as I said Friday night, are 7. We have 7 phases of emotion. And they've got names, as you can see. Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzah, Yesod, and Malchus. And the truth of the matter is that each one of these 7 is made up of each other. So as I said Friday night, your emotions are 7 squared, 49. So that's a very powerful template to analyze an individual's emotional state. Much more sophisticated than anything I learned in university in psychology. So they're the translations, but the point being that when the neshama flows through the body, there are variations of the theme. But here comes an interesting question. Do feelings come first, or does mind come first? Hands up, mind. Hands up, feelings. Right? That means half of you are wrong. It's an interesting question. Now think about it for a moment. And now let me ask you a question. How is it possible to have a feeling without an initial interpretation? How can you possibly feel good, bad, sad, or happy unless you've already interpreted a situation that therefore launches that feeling? Mind must come first. Having said that, many people experience many episodes where the mind seems not to be there at all. You've said of people, oh, that's a purely emotional individual, or that's an emotional reaction. Well, what that really means is that mind has had a very limited peek in. But it's there. Mastery, as we'll see shortly, is a matter of allowing us to use the wisdom of the mind to produce wise emotions. But let's get there. The problem with our lives is that we live in the uncertainty principle. We don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. It was actually a scientist, a quantum physicist by the name of Heidegger, that coined the phrase the uncertainty principle. And I've just adapted it for this. In other words, no one in this room is a prophet. And if there is, my apologies. So you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And that brings tension. Because we want to predict tomorrow. Why might we want to predict tomorrow? Because we'll feel more comfortable. We'll know what we're up against.
Should I bring an umbrella?
That's right, exactly. And that's, by the way, why I said, or may not have said on Friday, that anger is also a mechanism to try to take out the uncertainty of a situation. Because if I can lift my voice and take a threatening stance and make you do what I want you to do, I will feel better. Pure egotism. But again, it's to remove the uncertainty of a situation. So how do we cope with uncertainty? When did uncertainty begin? Always. There's never been a case of a human being living on earth that hasn't faced uncertainty. So under those circumstances, we need to know, how do we manage the uncomfortable sense of uncertainty? And not only that, but if we mismanage it, and the result is stress and anxiousness, the physiologists have taught us the following. It extends down to what we heard in the previous lecture, to the cellular level of the body. Meaning mind and body are very much attuned and aligned and have a direct line. When you think negatively, it hurts the body. When you think positively, it helps the body. We know that when a person is stressed, which means that they're mismanaging their uncertainty, the result is as follows. And doctor, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have on the surface of the cell things called receptors. And receptors are waiting for ligands, which flow freely in our bloodstream, to find the right opening to the correct receptor. When it does, successfully, it changes the whole manufacturing plant of the cell. In other words, receptors are preparing Shabbos, and they want guests and visitors, and ligands are the visitors, and they want them at the table. The problem is that if you create a lot of fog, winter storms, snow, and the like, it's going to be very hard for the visitors to find their way in. That fog, that storm, is called stress. And stress makes it therefore very difficult for the cellular function to be correct. So I'm just giving you incentive to think in terms of how to undo stress. That's nice, I like that one. You're a bright soul, wonderful. Good, keep that up. So the Alter Rebbe, in the magnum opus Sefer Tanya, which I'm sure everyone in this room has studied. And those of you who have not, you have to bang down the doors on your rabbi saying, why have you been holding out on me? Right? Make sure. It's probably the best work that I know to explain the nature of self and the cosmos and the interrelationship. One of the mastery teachings that the Alter Rebbe poses in that work is called, or is worded, Moach Shalit al Halev. The mind determines the outcomes of the emotions. So we're going back to the discussion of what comes first, mind and emotions. And the Alter Rebbe is saying we have to ensure that there's a sufficient quality and quantity of mind in order to ensure that our feelings are appropriate or wise. Western thought has finally caught up to the Alter Rebbe, and they call it emotional intelligence, which is exactly that. But how do you create that? How are you able to train in order to make that happen? Because everything requires how-tos, requires methodology. We aren't born tzaddikim. By the way, a little segue. The author of the Tanya notes that we shouldn't try to become a tzaddik, or to emulate one Eastern tradition that says you should try to become the Buddha within. He doesn't want us to seek perfection. In fact, he says it's egotistic to try to achieve that. You will recall that he nominates 3 kinds of personalities: the tzaddik, perfect master, the rasha, the evil individual, and a curious hybrid called Beinoni, from the Hebrew Bein, which means in between, the Mr. or Miss in-betweener. He defines the tzaddik as someone who never does anything wrong, never says anything wrong, and never thinks anything wrong. That's why aspiring to be that is not a particularly useful task. But the interesting thing is that he does want us to aspire to be a Beinoni. In fact, the name of Tanya, another name that's given there, is Sefer Shel Beinonim, the book of the Beinoni. Now the Beinoni, listen to this, never does anything wrong, never says anything wrong, and always is able to undo any negative thoughts. So you wonder, hold on, wasn't that the definition of a tzaddik? What's the difference? So he points out that tzaddik doesn't have to fight to make that happen. The tzaddik has already mastered all that. It's automatic. The tzaddik is habitually perfect. The Beinoni has to fight every inch of the way. Temptation is always real. The possibility of erring is completely on the horizon. But the Beinoni each time is able to draw on willpower to be able to overcome the immediacy of the test. So as far as external appearances are concerned, we can't distinguish between a tzaddik and a Beinoni. And yet, the internal dynamics are radically different. So going back to the art and the skill of the mind being able to shape the emotions, it's a matter of being able to become familiar with your mind process and remembering to be able to focus on mind in any one situation before you blindly emote without giving mind sufficiency. So as I said the other night, anger, people provoke you, children are chutzpahdik to you. If the mind doesn't get enough play, the emotions run wild. How dare you speak to me like that? How can you say to me those things? And that's pure emotion because you are a victim. You've decided that you have to defend yourself, instead of, as I said, changing your interpretation, letting the mind do its work, cognitive restructuring, changing the way you read the situation. And as I said Friday night, you shift from self-centeredness to other-centeredness. In other words, not how dare you speak to me like that, but rather they're yelling and screaming at me. What's causing them the pain, emotional pain or physical pain that causes them to scream? Because no one screams for nothing. So you've shifted the center of gravity from self to other. You've restructured. You've interpreted differently. And therefore your feelings have moved from selfish feelings of being a victim. Strange when I use the word selfish and victim in the same breath, but I do. As opposed to being compassionate, empathic. All because you have reinterpreted. In other words, change your mind to change who you are in the moment. That's very, very important. But we've got an obstacle course because we have a constant inner battle. We're constantly a part of a duality. We have two tendencies, self and other. We have one part of our spiritual energy, which we call nefesh bahamit, or nefesh bahamis. That section of our soul flow is completely focused on survival instinct, food, clothing, shelter. And there's nothing wrong with that, except it doesn't know when to stop. How much food? How much clothing? How much shelter? Food? I won't eat anything unless it's haute cuisine, master chef. Clothing? Unless it's designer Laibl, forget it. Shelter? I need to have a chandelier in every room, including the toilet. In other words, the nefesh bahamis, our so-called survival instinct, doesn't know when to stop surviving. It's in a constant state of insecurity. Therefore, it needs more and more and more. I want, I want, I want. We call that immaturity. And we usually associate immaturity with children. But unfortunately, many adults remain children in this respect. They still want more, more and more. I want your trains, I want your dolls, becomes I want your wife, and I want your assets, and I want your shares. It's just different toys. But it's exactly the same tendency. To be able to truly grow up means that we need another part of self. And that's called the nefesh elokis. Another part of our inner spiritual flow says happiness, fulfillment comes from sharing, giving, and contribution. To be other-centered, to be God-centered. And these two tendencies are in constant battle within us, constantly. And we need to resolve that each time. It's like two warring armies fighting for the battleground, which is our body. Each one wants to dominate. So every time that we think, machshava, every time that we speak, dibur, every time that we act, ma'aseh, we're resolving these two equal and opposite tendencies. That's the life of a Beinoni. The Alter Rebbe says every one of us can achieve success if we know what's right from wrong, and we call up sufficient willpower and commitment. And then the third factor, and I think this is the part that's missing in the Jewish world and world at large, the methodology of training to become masterful in all exigencies of life. I mentioned earlier today, so I'm not going to spend time on it, that there is even a shortcut, and that's the practice of emunah and bitachon, faith and trust. And what I said to this When did I say that? Today. That's a bit more complicated. It's not bad. That person will take more time with me. All right. Faith and trust. Just very quickly going over that. Emunah, faith, is the belief that everything that has happened to you is for your current good. No matter what it's been, God forbid, whether you've had a difficult, early, formative childhood life, whether you've had difficulties in maintaining your existence, if you have difficulty in relationships, whatever it is, it's for your current good, I assure you. Bitachon is the belief that the challenge that you face now will have a positive outcome, no matter what the challenge. Hashem does not send us challenges that we don't have the means to overcome. Hashem has not created an unfair world. As Einstein said, God does not play dice with the world. Emunah deals from the past to the present. Whatever has happened to you in the past is for your current good. Bitachon deals from the present to the future. The challenge you face now will have a positive outcome. I assure you, you will have no stress if you adopt these principles in life. As I said earlier today, axiomatically, as belief positions. And don't tell me that you aren't a believing individual. Everyone in this room is a believer, and I can prove it to you. How did you get here? By car? You know the stats on fatalities tonight. God forbid, people die tonight on the roads. The modern person with perfect equanimity gets into the car and drives here to hear this talk. Why? Because you believed you'd get here. That's all. It's not logical. You wouldn't take a risk with your life, and yet you did. So we are all potential believers in every respect. I'm asking you to believe in Emunah and Bitachon, axiomatically. Because, as I said earlier, positively disposed people are healthier and have much better relationships because people like to be around positive people. Whereas if you become, God forbid, a pessimist, a negative, inclined individual who worries about every certain circumstance, the result is you'll be unhealthy, and also at the very same time, who is it? Tell me. Okay. And at the very same time, you won't have many positive relationships because people don't like to be around negative people. Okay. That's as much theory that I'd like to posit tonight, and I'd like to begin a little meditative exercise. But before so doing, what are your thoughts? Can you please stop worrying? It's not worth it. Worrying means I'm an aspiring prophet. That's what worry means. Worry means, hold on, I'm just going to wait for it to come to me, and until I know I'm going to be very upset. Well, guess what? It's never going to come to you. You're not going to have the vision. And if you do, you'll be put away. Yes.
So, I know that we learned from, our forefathers, the Avos, but didn't we see that Jacob, when he was about to meet Esau, wasn't he worried? And here he has a direct communication with God, yet we see that there was some worry there.
Yes. This is why, and the question is, when Jacob was going to meet Esau, it appears that he was a very worried person. And on the surface, so it appears. And this is where the study of Hasidus is so terribly important. Because there are many truths at multi-layers. There are 4 levels to understanding the Torah. Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Do you remember when we all first met for the first time? It was 3,500 years ago at the foot of Mount Sinai. You don't remember? Short-term memory, it happens. Well, there we were, and Moshe Rabbeinu comes down and he gives us the Torah. He teaches the Torah to everybody, the plain meaning, like translation. And that's what you read. And it seems on the surface he was afraid, Jacob. But then Moshe Rabbeinu takes a more limited grouping of people and teaches them a deeper level of the same Torah. And that level becomes known as remez, hint, or innuendo. What lies beneath the words when you hint to somebody without saying it explicitly. And there's a whole level of understanding and commentaries who specialize at that level of understanding of the Torah. Then Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, takes an even more circumspect group of people and teaches them a third, an even deeper level, a level that became known as drush. And drush, associated with, say, midrash, is literature that seems to be totally fanciful, almost fable-like, stories, exaggerations. Rest assured that beneath those lie immense truths. I'll give you an example. A young man comes to Albert Einstein and he says, "Teach me the theory of relativity." So Einstein asks him, "Do you know any math?" "No." "Do you know any physics?" "No." So Einstein says, "Fine, I'll teach it to you. It's quite simple. If you're sitting on a couch with your girlfriend for 10 minutes, it'll feel like a mere 10 seconds. But if you're sitting on a very hot stove for 10 seconds, it'll feel like a full 10 minutes. Relativity, just like that. That's drush. That's what midrash does. And then Moshe Rabbeinu takes an even smaller, far smaller grouping of people and teaches them a level of the Torah known as sod, which literally means secret. And it's taught from master to student. The student receives it. The Hebrew word to receive, lekabel, the noun, kabbalah. That level remains subterranean for many, many centuries. And indeed, doesn't become recorded till much later in the 2nd century. And then it doesn't become published till another millennium later in the person of Moses de Leon. And doesn't become studied in study groups until even further to the 1600s in Sfat, Israel. And doesn't become a matter of common knowledge until the Baal Shem Tov comes into the scene with the rise of Hasidism. As I said most earlier, Hasidism came onto the scene at that moment of explosion of knowledge that you and I are the inheritors of, and it continues. And it's that level, known as Hasidus, that enters into a deeper understanding of all 4 levels. So now to answer your question, at some level that's the way it looks. But if you study the Hasidus on it, you'll learn a completely different narrative. You know what he's concerned about? He's concerned whether he's able to use the immense spiritual quality that consists inside Esav and attach it to his own qualities, so there will be a spiritual vision moment that would create a new state of reality. And I've said big words, forget what I've said. All I'm saying is there's much deeper implications in a much more profound narrative. So imagine if you studied Hasidus every week on the Torah, you'd have the capacity to be able to see multi-levels of truth in the one sentence, in the one statement. It's all open, it's in English, it's in translation, yep.
What, for example, like the Jewish people in Germany and throughout Europe before the Holocaust, the people that were worried about what was happening left, but the people that didn't worry so much stayed.
It's more complicated. It's not that they didn't worry. If I were to get up here, which I would never do, and say, you know, America is doomed. Jewish life in America is really going to go through a terrible period. Get up and go. Do you think anyone would listen? No, it's going to be better. It's not so bad. I've got my whole life here. I've got the home here. I've got children here. Won't get up and go. That's what happened in Germany. My wife's uncle wrote a book at the age of 100. It's a very famous book now. He wrote it 2-3 years ago. It's quite a recent book. It's called The Happiest Man on Earth. It's a short read, about 180 pages. I advise everyone to get it. My uncle, my wife's uncle, was, as I shared with you somewhere earlier today, my mother-in-law spent 4 years in Auschwitz. Well, her brother was in Auschwitz for the same 4 years. He was the instrument maker for Mengele for his medical experimentation, because he had very good hands, and that's how he survived, by making the instruments. And he went through horrific circumstances. And at the age of 100, he writes how he is the happiest man in the world. An amazing response to the negativity of those times. He passed away at 102 some 6 months ago. It's our choice how we respond to the exigencies of every moment. It's our choice if we're going to be worried or not worried. There aren't any objective circumstances. It's all subjective, but here it is. God decides the end. God decides whether the medication will work or not work. It's not the medicine. The Rebbe says over and over again, the doctor has been chosen to be the instrument of healing from above. It's a different discussion who is to be defined as a doctor and not a doctor, but putting that aside. So that it's not the actual medication. Everything that we have becomes a potential gain. We divided reality into 4 groupings earlier today: human beings, animal, vegetation, and inanimate. And we said each one possesses a level of soul. Well, even the inanimate, the substances, the chemicals of the world are very valuable parts of creation that have potential healing qualities. But at the end of the day, it's the energy that underlies the chemistry, the energy that underlies what the doctor prescribes that does the healing. And therefore, if you have faith in the healer, that makes it a much more direct process of healing. Anyway, it's time for meditation, but there's 2 more questions. Sorry, yes. 1, 2.
Could you expound more about why you would use the word good on what you have on the screen?
Yes.
It seems a bit of a qualifier.
Yes, it is. As I said earlier today, you weren't there. We have a definition of what's good and what's bad and what's right and what's wrong. We don't live in a world of relativism in this regard. I think that I challenged you last night by asking you, could anyone in this room please give me a logical reason not to commit murder? Did I ask you, or was that another audience? It's all become a blur now. Well, let me ask you, could someone please tell me, why is it wrong to murder, logically?
What right do I have to
Well,
all of our lives are
you have every right in the world. It gives you pleasure. I'm a perverse individual. I get a lot of pleasure in murdering people, and therefore it's one life. I only live once. Let me do it. What's wrong with that? Yes?
I don't know, you wouldn't want someone to do to you what you wouldn't want, or you would.
So it's a sort of protection investments that you're making, right? Well, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to be stronger. I'm just going to kill. I'm going to have the pleasure out of it. And you know what? If I die a happy person.
Yeah.
In the back, and then the lady here. Yes.
Probably won't get away with it.
What do you mean I won't get away with it? I'll do the murder, that's okay. If they put me away, I've had my thrill in life.
Doesn't everyone?
Yes.
It's unlikely.
The lady here.
Because you set in frame a process of retaliation and vendetta.
Yeah, it sort of upsets society. Well, you know what? So what? It's me. Life's about me. It's a short life. Let me make the best of it the way I want to see it.
But it will also affect ultimately your children, your grandchildren.
They'll have to fend for themselves, I'm sorry. Okay, there's no logical answer, by the way. None. There's no logical answer unless you adduce an axiomatic belief that life is sacrosanct. There is no reason to put someone who's a murderer in jail, whether you put the murderer in jail because you want to protect society, or whether you put the murderer in jail because you want to punish the person, or whether you want to try to make the person a better person, whatever the reasons might be. But you have no right to do it unless there's a belief that murder is wrong. And that's what I'm telling you. Emunah b'tochon. So to answer your question, the belief system that we Jewish people adopt is the axiomatic teachings of the Torah. The Torah tells us what's right and what's wrong. And therefore that becomes the barometer. So we don't live life that's relativistic. What's right in one society becomes wrong in another society or under different circumstances. Murder is wrong because Hashem said it's wrong. So good and bad follows from that. They're absolutes. No one? That's it? Okay. Let's do a little meditation. And before I do, let me just say a word about meditation. If you consult Professor Google, you'll have hundreds of definitions of meditation, many of which are mutually exclusive, and many of the purveyors and sellers of meditation will say, don't listen to him, just listen to me. I have the right way. Meditation is just a word. It used to mean, before the 60s, deep thought. But after some enterprising Hindu gurus made their way across to the West, they introduced formats, or what they called specific formats of meditation. And that's how meditation generally became viewed here. And as I said earlier to you, there are some concerns about some of the Eastern meditations and Jewish soul systems. But that does not mean that focusing, which is the common denominator behind all meditations, the common denominator behind all meditation is focusing. Why you focus, how you focus, what modalities you use, and the like depends on the spiritual values and the teachings of a particular pathway, whatever the pathway might be. Judaism has always had focusing mechanisms and techniques. Aryeh Kaplan, in his book on meditation, some of you have read, provides many of the pathways that we used in the past. I do not recommend them, not because they're wrong, but because they're not useful. As he says himself, and told me in person when he was alive, he wrote a book of history, not a manual of practice. In fact, if you adopt some of those, it might be actually quite negative for your well-being. But the practice that we use in the Chabad tradition is hisboinenus. Hisboinenus, or the contemporary pronunciation might be hitbonenut, comes from the Hebrew word binah, and binah means understanding. The reflexive grammatical use of that source, hitbonenut, means how to allow the understanding to flow through you in such a way that you and it, the wisdom teaching, become one, so that you express it in your behavior, in your speech, in your thought process. We're not going to do that. That requires you to sit and study a piece of wisdom teaching, extract one particular aspect, focus on it in such a way that the tefillah, the prayer that follows it, is able to embed it within you for the day. But there are very important therapeutic forms of meditation. And the Rebbe, in a celebrated discourse, as I said to you earlier today, in 1979, said we have to extract meditative tools to be able to help and settle the mind. And one of them is breath. Now, breath is common to many a spiritual tradition, but in Judaism it adopts a particular meaning. The Hebrew word for breath is neshima. The Hebrew word for soul is neshama. Clearly the relationship. Breath is the first level of expression of the soul. And just as I said to some of us earlier, breath flows in and out, following the pattern of life. The energy of life flows in and out, and you have night and day. You have tides coming in and tides going out. You have petals opening and petals closing. Our breathing is a template, formed from the same template. Okay, that's all I'm going to say to you by way of preface. We're going to do a little bit of a breathing exercise, and I might extend that into an exercise in chesed. Let me find a chair. Put your feet symmetrically next to each other. Hands resting on knees and thighs. Back fairly straight. Head resting on your shoulders comfortably. And gently close your eyes. And just focus on your breath. Gently breathing in and breathing out. Follow your breath in and out. And if you can, breathe in and out through your nose. And as you breathe in, become aware that the air entering your nostrils is cool, and the air exiting from your nostrils is relatively warm. Breathing in, cool air. Breathing out, warm air. And just focus on that temperature differential. As you breathe in, cool. As you breathe out, warm. Deepen your breathing, slow it down. And with your next breaths, direct the breath down to your abdomen. The way to do that is as you breathe in, expand your abdomen, collecting the air there, and then pull your tummy in to expel the air. So deep breath in, expanding the abdomen, and pulling it in to expel the air. This is a little counterintuitive, so practice it. Slow, deep breath in through the nose, down to the abdomen, expanding it and contracting. And just practice 3 breaths in this manner. And now let's lend some rhythm to the breathing. We'll breathe in for a count of 3, hold for a count of 3, and breathe out for a count of 4. So take a slow, deep breath in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4. And just continue breathing rhythmically, abdominally, gracefully, smoothly, perfect circle. And just become aware at the back of your mind how relaxed you have become in the space of a few short moments. Become aware of a light source in your head. Picture it as a globe or anything you want, a source of light. And the light glows, providing light throughout your headspace, feeling warm and comfortable in your head. Energize that source of light so it's brighter and begins to flow down your neck to your upper torso, your chest and back, feeling the glow and the warmth extending through your upper body, arms and hands, feeling its warmth quite comfortably. Create a brighter glow in your head and allow that to filter down through your body to your lower body, through your thighs, legs, feet. Your whole body feels warm and comfortable, bright. Energize the light in your head even more, so that now an excess of light and warmth penetrates through your skin, creating an aura around you. So you find yourself inside the aura of your heart, which is your Shabbos.